In the hushed living room of the mansion, an unexpected instant froze the air. The millionaire opened the door and stood petrified. His maid was holding his twin boys in her arms, and the little ones nestled against her as if they had found their true mother. From the doorway, he felt something inside his world crack open. What secret did this woman carry that gave them what he never could? And before we continue, let me wish you health and peace. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story? Alexander Whitmore guided his black SUV through the iron gates of his Brookline estate, the hum of the engine breaking the quiet of an early autumn evening. Maple leaves, crisp and golden, scattered across the driveway like forgotten confetti from a celebration that never took place. The house rose before him, stately and cold, its windows glowing faintly against the dimming sky. To most people in Boston, this home was a symbol of success. To Alexander, it was a mausoleum of silence. He stepped out, briefcase in hand, adjusting the lapel of his tailored navy suit. The faint toll of church bells drifted from a distance, reminding the neighborhood that Sunday service had ended hours ago. Families were probably gathering around dinner tables now, pot roast, steaming, voices overlapping, laughter spilling through open windows. But here, the only sound that greeted him was the metallic click of his shoes against marble steps. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and emptiness. The grand foyer, with its chandelier imported from Venice, cast reflections on a floor that gleamed too perfectly. His house staff had done their job, as always, leaving no trace of life, no fingerprint on the banister, no mug on the counter. Order was Alexander's fortress. But lately, order had begun to feel like exile. On the wall by the staircase hung a portrait of Catherine, his late wife. Her smile had been captured just weeks before her pregnancy reached its final month. She had that glow, everybody said, so the light of anticipation in her green eyes, a hand resting gently on the curve of her belly. He could not look at the painting for more than a second. It was both a memory and a wound, always open, never healing. She had died giving life to their sons, Ethan and Noah. The twins were upstairs now, somewhere beyond the echo of his footsteps. He could hear them thin wails piercing down the corridor, a chorus of need that never seemed to rest. For months, their cries had filled the house like a storm. No nanny had lasted. Each one had quit within weeks, leaving polite letters and apologies behind. "They don't sleep, Mr. Whitmore," they had said. "They won't settle. They need help beyond what I can give." He paid them generously, offered bonuses, but no amount of money could silence the heartbreak in those words. He reached the nursery door and hesitated. The crying was louder now, raw, insistent. Alexander pushed the door open, briefcase slipping slightly in his grasp. Two cribs stood on opposite sides of the room, identical in design but holding children who seemed to resist every comfort the world tried to offer. Ethan's fists were clenched, face red with effort. Noah arched his back as if trying to escape invisible pain. "Enough," Alexander muttered, though the word was lost under their sobs. He set down the briefcase, pressing his palms against his temples. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals in glass towers overlooking the Charles River. He had stood before boards of directors, calm under fire. Yet here, in front of two tiny lives, he was powerless. A figure stepped into the doorway, a woman in her early 30s, dark hair tied neatly back, wearing simple clothes that contrasted sharply with the grandeur of the room. She was new, hired only days ago to manage the cleaning, not the children. Her name was Elena Marlowe. In her hands, she held a folded blanket, clearly on her way to another task. But something in her face changed as she looked at the twins. "They haven't stopped all afternoon," Alexander said without looking at her, his voice clipped, weary. Elena didn't answer right away. She crossed the room quietly, placing the blanket over a chair. Then, without seeking permission, she leaned down and lifted Noah into her arms. Alexander's jaw tightened. This was not her role, not her place. He opened his mouth to correct her, but the words froze. Noah's cries faltered, then softened into hiccups. Elena shifted him gently against her chest, humming something low, almost like a lullaby. Ethan's sobs quieted too, his little head turning toward the sound as though drawn by an invisible thread. Within minutes, the nursery was filled with a stillness Alexander had not known in 6 months. He stared, unable to move. The marble floor felt unsteady beneath his feet. These were his sons, children who never slept, who never stopped crying, and now they were calm, resting as if they had always belonged in her arms. Alexander's throat tightened, and he forced himself to look away, busying his hands with the cuff of his shirt. He reminded himself that Catherine's absence had left a void no one could fill, not another doctor, not a nanny, and certainly not a woman hired to scrub marble floors. Yet, standing there, he could not deny what his own eyes had witnessed. Elena did not look at him. Her focus was entirely on the baby in her arms. She adjusted Noah, then reached for Ethan with a calm assurance that seemed second nature. In moments, she had both boys against her, one strapped to her chest with a faded cloth she pulled from her bag, the other nestled against her shoulder. The cries faded into soft breaths, the tiny fists uncurled, and for the first time in months, the room was still. Alexander exhaled a sharp breath. "What do you think you're doing?" His tone was harsher than he intended. She glanced up at him, eyes steady, voice low but clear. "Holding them, that's all. You were hired to clean, not this. They need someone," Elena replied, almost whispering, as if the truth were too simple to argue against. Sometimes that's all it takes. He wanted to snap back, to remind her of rules, of roles, of boundaries. But the sight of his sons, their heads heavy with sleep, their small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm, stripped him of words. He felt anger coil inside him, not at her, but at himself. How could a stranger step into his home and do in seconds what no professional, no system, no routine had managed? He left the room abruptly, retreating down the hall. His footsteps echoed against the polished floor as though mocking him. In his study, he poured a glass of whiskey, though he didn't drink it. He sat behind the mahogany desk, the glow of a banker's lamp casting shadows across photographs that lined the shelves. In one, Catherine smiled on their wedding day. In another, she stood barefoot on the porch, holding a mug of coffee as sunlight kissed her hair. Each frame was a reminder of promises he had not been able to keep. He rested his forehead against folded hands. It wasn't just grief. It was failure. He had mastered every battlefield except this one. Boardrooms, negotiations, mergers, all had bent to his will. But fatherhood had exposed him, left him helpless. Upstairs, the house was quieter than it had been in months. He could hear faint footsteps, Elena moving gently, humming again. The sound traveled through the vents like a memory he couldn't escape. It reminded him of nights when Catherine would hum absent-mindedly, hand tracing the swell of her belly, whispering to the boys before they were even born. A pang of guilt struck deep. He had been absent even then, buried in meetings, phone calls, strategies. Catherine had always forgiven him, always said, "You're building a future for them." But now, that future felt hollow without her. The whiskey remained untouched. Alexander rose and moved to the window. Outside, the street lamps lit the quiet avenue, where families returned from Sunday dinners, cars pulling into driveways, porch lights flicking on. He imagined laughter spilling out of homes, ordinary laughter that required no wealth, no boardroom, no success. The cries upstairs had ended. Silence, sweet, fragile silence, wrapped the house. He clenched his jaw, knowing he owed that stillness not to himself, but to a stranger who had walked into his home with nothing more than steady hands and a gentle hum. He didn't know whether to feel grateful or threatened. But one thing was certain. The balance of his carefully ordered world had shifted tonight. And as he stood there, the marble beneath his feet felt suddenly unsteady. How could it be that his sons, who had only known tears, found peace in the arms of someone else? The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, soft and golden, but the house still felt cold. Breakfast had been laid out by the staff, fresh coffee, eggs, warm bread, but Alexander barely touched his plate. He had risen before dawn, restless, mind turning over the scene from last night again and again, the sound of his sons finally resting, the stillness that had felt impossible for 6 months, and Elena's steady hands holding them as if she had known them forever. The twins were still sleeping when he passed the nursery. He stopped at the doorway, peering inside. Ethan stirred slightly but did not cry. Noah let out a small sigh, still caught in a dream. The room smelled faintly of baby powder and warm milk. For once, it wasn't filled with screams. Alexander stood frozen, listening, wondering if he was imagining it. Behind him, a voice broke the silence. They had a good night. Elena was folding laundry in the hallway, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. She spoke as though it was the most natural thing in the world that the boys had slept soundly. He turned to face her, jaw tightening. That's never happened, he said flatly. She nodded, keeping her eyes on the clothes in her hands. Maybe they just needed someone close. Sometimes babies know when they're not alone. Her words unsettled him. They sounded too simple, too obvious, yet they carried a truth he hadn't considered. He wanted to dismiss them, to remind her she was the housekeeper, not a nanny. But the evidence was right in front of him. His sons were at peace. Later that morning, Alexander drove into Boston. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm-honking cars, the rattle of the T-trains, students rushing across the streets of Cambridge. He parked outside his office tower overlooking the Charles River. His assistant greeted him with a stack of folders and updates on international deals. But his thoughts drifted. He nodded mechanically, signing documents without reading them closely. Eyes pulled back to Brookline, to the silence of the nursery, to Elena's humming. By noon, he found himself sitting in a small cafe in Beacon Hill instead of his usual executive lunch. The place was crowded with locals, elderly couples sharing sandwiches, college students typing away on laptops. He sat by the window, suit standing out against the casual crowd. The waitress brought him black coffee, and he left a tip before she even placed it down, just to avoid small talk. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a mother bouncing her infant gently while sipping her drink. The child cooed softly, tiny fingers gripping the mother's sweater. The scene was simple, ordinary, yet it struck him with a force greater than any boardroom crisis. He felt a pang of envy for something so basic, so natural, that he, with all his success, could not seem to give his own children. When he returned home that evening, the mansion smelled faintly of lemon polish and simmering stew. The twins were awake now, fussing lightly, but not screaming. Elena was on the floor with them, rolling a soft ball between the cribs, her laughter warm and unguarded. The babies responded with small gurgles, their eyes following the ball, their bodies relaxing. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching. For a moment, it felt like intruding on something private, almost sacred. He cleared his throat, and Elena looked up, smiling briefly before turning back to the children. They like this game, she said simply. They've never played before, he replied, his tone more defensive than intended. They've never had the chance. Her answer was gentle, without accusation, but it cut him deeply. Dinner that night was quiet, as most evenings in the Whitmore house had been. The long mahogany table gleamed under chandelier light, yet only one end was used. Alexander seated with a plate of roast chicken, a glass of water by his hand. He ate mechanically, glancing at the high chairs that remained empty, still wrapped in plastic since delivery. The twins had always been fed separately by staff, never at this table. But tonight, faint sounds of their coos echoed from the adjoining room. Elena had placed them in a playpen near the dining room doors. She was kneeling beside them, spooning mashed vegetables into tiny mouths, humming as she worked. The sight unsettled Alexander. It was as though his private fortress, once sealed by grief and order, was slowly being breached. He set down his fork, voice sharp. You don't have to keep doing that. Elena looked up, startled. Doing what? Acting like you're their mother? The words slipped out harsher than he meant. Her expression did not change. She dabbed a bit of food from Noah's cheek with a napkin, then said calmly, I'm not. I'm just here when they need someone. The simplicity of her reply disarmed him. He wanted to argue, to reclaim control. But the twins laughed, then genuine, bubbling laughter that filled the air like music. He hadn't heard that sound before. The walls that had once echoed only with cries now held something new, something he did not understand. Later, after the staff retired for the night, Alexander wandered the quiet halls. The house felt different, less like a monument, more like a home, though he would not admit it aloud. He paused at the nursery door again. Elena sat on the floor, legs crossed, gently rocking Ethan while Noah lay curled beside her. She was telling them a story in a soft voice, about fireflies on summer nights and the way children chase them with jars. The twins listened, eyes wide, as though they understood every word. Alexander lingered, leaning against the doorway. He remembered Catherine once telling him about her own childhood summers in Maine, chasing fireflies with cousins until her father called them back to the porch. The memory tugged at him, unexpected and sharp. When Elena finally noticed him, she didn't stop speaking. She finished her story, then kissed each baby's forehead before tucking them into their cribs. The room dimmed as she switched off the lamp, leaving only the glow of a nightlight. "You should get some rest," Alexander said, his voice rough, almost unsure. "I will," she replied, moving past him. "But they'll rest better if you say goodnight." He froze. "What?" "They know your voice," Elena said, her eyes meeting his. "Even if you don't think so." Her words lingered after she left. Alexander stepped quietly into the nursery. The twins stirred faintly, but did not cry. He stood between their cribs, awkward, uncertain. Slowly, he whispered, "Good night, Ethan. Good night, Noah." His voice cracked, barely audible, yet the baby settled deeper into sleep. Alexander felt his chest tighten, as if something long locked away had shifted. He turned to leave, but his legs felt heavy, his breath unsteady. And as he stood in the doorway, listening to the silence of his son sleeping peacefully, he realized he was more afraid of this new tenderness than of the endless crying that had haunted the house for months. The following week brought colder winds to Brookline, leaves scattering across the long driveway, like restless whispers. Inside the Whitmore estate, change was happening quietly, though Alexander tried hard to resist naming it. The twins cried less now, slept longer, even gurgled when Elena played with them. The staff noticed the difference: meals prepared with less haste, hallways echoing with softer sounds. But Alexander carried a weight he could not put down. At his office in Boston, he sat through meetings distracted. His associates presented quarterly reports, graphs glowing on large screens, but numbers blurred into meaningless lines. He caught himself staring out the window, eyes fixed on the Charles River glinting in the weak sunlight. He wondered what the boys were doing, if they were calm, if Elena was still humming to them. He shook the thought off quickly, adjusting his tie as if to reclaim authority. He had built his empire on discipline, and now his focus faltered at the memory of a lullaby. One afternoon, returning home earlier than usual, he found Elena in the garden behind the house. The boys were on a blanket spread across the grass, bundled in sweaters. Their tiny hands reaching for the last rays of autumn Sunday, Elena was kneeling, letting them clutch fallen leaves, her laughter gentle. The scene felt almost too intimate, too domestic. He stood at the patio doors, watching longer than he meant to, until she looked up. "They like being outside," she said, as if she had known he was there all along. He stepped forward, hands in his pockets. "It's chilly. They could get sick." "They're warm enough." She tucked the blanket tighter around Ethan and Noah. "Fresh air helps. They're calmer afterward." Her certainty unsettled him. He wanted to object, but the twins' quiet smiles betrayed her rightness. He pressed his lips together, choosing silence instead. Later that evening, he received a phone call. The voice on the other end was sharp, measured, familiar. Veronica Hale, Catherine's longtime friend and the twins' godmother. She had kept her distance since the funeral, citing work and travel. But now her tone carried something else. "Alexander," she began, "I hear you've hired new help. A woman. Elena? Is it?" "Yes," he answered cautiously. "She manages the household." A pause, then Veronica's voice, colder. "I'm not sure that's wise. Children are delicate. You can't trust just anyone with them." "She's been effective," Alexander admitted reluctantly. "Effective?" Veronica's laugh was brittle. "They're infants, not a quarterly report. You need stability, Alexander, not charity cases wandering into your home." Her words struck him, though he couldn't explain why. He ended the call curtly, staring at the silent phone long after. Veronica's judgment lingered like smoke. That night, he passed the nursery once more. Elena was reading softly, the twins half asleep. Her voice wove through the dim light, patient and calm. He leaned against the doorframe, torn between the relief of seeing his sons at peace and the unease Veronica had planted in him. The conversation with Veronica stayed with Alexander long after the house had gone quiet. Her words carried the weight of old connections, of Catherine's past, and he found himself pacing his study, torn between gratitude for the peace Elena had brought and suspicion seeded by someone he had once trusted. He He poured another glass of water, ignoring the untouched whiskey, then returned to the nursery. Elena had already left for the night, retreating to her small room near the kitchen. The twins slept soundly in their cribs, their tiny faces relaxed, breaths even. Alexander leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching them. He should have felt relief. Instead, a restlessness gnawed at him. The next day, Veronica arrived unannounced. Her presence filled the foyer before her voice did heels clicking, perfume sharp, her posture commanding. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her pearl necklace catching the chandelier light. When Alexander came down the stairs, she greeted him with a kiss on the cheek that felt more like a claim than a courtesy. "I needed to see you," she said, eyes sweeping the grand room before narrowing slightly. "And the children?" Alexander hesitated. "They're resting." "Then wake them." She walked past him toward the nursery, not waiting for permission. By the time they reached the door, Elena was already inside, soothing Ethan with a quiet hum. Veronica froze, her expression hardening. "And who might you be?" she asked, voice edged with disdain. "Elena Marlowe," came the calm reply. "I look after the boys." Look after?" Veronica's laugh was brittle. "Alexander, is this the woman? The one I warned you about?" Alexander's jaw clenched. "She's been helping." The boys respond to her. Veronica stepped closer to the crib, eyeing Ethan as if she could read trouble in his small features. "Infants respond to anyone who picks them up. That doesn't mean they're safe." Elena met her gaze evenly, not rising to the bait. Safety isn't only about walls and locks. It's about being held when they cry, about being seen. The room fell silent. Alexander shifted uncomfortably, caught between the quiet authority in Elena's words and the sharpness of Veronica's presence. He felt torn in two directions, one toward control and suspicion, the other toward trust and possibility. That night, after Veronica left with promises to check in again soon, Alexander lingered in the nursery long after Elena had retired. He whispered another good night to his sons, his hand brushing the crib rail. He was beginning to sense that the real conflict ahead would not be between him and the children, or even his grief, but between the voices pulling him apart, Veronica's skepticism and Elena's simple, steady faith. As he closed the door softly behind him, the unease followed, heavy as the autumn night pressing against the windows. The following days carried the chill of late October, and with it came a heaviness Alexander could not shake. The estate seemed caught between silence and tension, the laughter of his children now shadowed by Veronica's sharp remarks echoing in his mind. He buried himself in work, arriving at his Boston office earlier, staying later, yet even skyscraper glass and the drone of meetings could not drown out the memory of Elena's steady hands. One evening, arriving home later than usual, Alexander found Elena in the library. The twins were asleep upstairs, and she was on a step stool dusting shelves that hadn't been touched in years. She held a stack of worn books, their spines faded. He paused in the doorway, surprised by the domestic calm of the scene. "You don't need to do that," he said. "The staff handles the library once a month." Elena turned, holding one of the books with care. "I know, but these looked forgotten." She brushed a layer of dust from the cover, revealing delicate handwriting inside. She opened the first page. "This one. It belonged to Catherine, didn't it?" Alexander stepped closer, his chest tightening. The book was a collection of poems, Catherine's favorite. He recognized her handwriting in the margins, soft notes, underlined verses. For a moment, the air between them thickened, filled with memories he had locked away. "She loved those," he said quietly. Elena traced a line with her finger, her eyes distant. "I know. She used to read them aloud when we studied together." Alexander's breath caught. "You knew her?" Elena looked up, startled by her own words. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, years ago, at Boston University. We shared classes, traded notes. She was kind to me, in a way no one else was." The revelation landed like a stone in Alexander's chest. All this time, he had seen Elena as a stranger, an outsider who happened to bring peace into his house. But now, the threads tangled tighter, Catherine's past brushing against his present in ways he had not expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. His voice was sharper than intended. Elena closed the book gently, setting it aside. "Because this job wasn't about me. It was about them, the boys. I didn't think you needed another story from the past. I thought you needed help with the present." He studied her face, trying to decipher her intent. Suspicion mixed with an ache he could not name. If she had known Catherine, then perhaps her presence here was not chance at all. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, scattering leaves across the lawn. Alexander turned toward the sound, unsettled. For the first time, he wondered if fate had placed Elena in his home, or if it was something more deliberate. The library grew quiet, the ticking of the grandfather clock filling the silence between them. Alexander stared at the book in Elena's hands, each second stretching longer than the last. Catherine's handwriting danced across the page, a ghostly bridge between past and present. He had believed his wife's world ended with her death, sealed away in photographs and fading memories. Now, standing before him was someone who carried pieces of that world in her own heart. Elena placed the poetry book back on the shelf, her movements gentle. "Catherine once told me," she said softly, "that the hardest thing in life isn't loss, but learning how to keep living after it. I didn't understand then. I do now." Alexander turned away, gripping the back of a chair. "You should have told me sooner. I was afraid you'd send me away," Elena admitted. "And the boys, they need someone. I didn't want the past to make things harder for them." Her words cut through him. He wanted to be angry, to accuse her of hiding the truth, but all he felt was the weight of his own inadequacy. The boys slept peacefully now, not because of him, but because of her presence. And if she truly had known Catherine, then perhaps her care for them ran deeper than duty. A knock echoed at the front door, startling them both. The hour was late. Alexander crossed the hall, opening it to find Veronica standing in the cold, her coat wrapped tightly around her frame. Her eyes flicked past him into the house. "I needed to see the children," she said briskly, stepping inside without waiting. Alexander bristled. "It's nearly midnight. Children don't keep schedules," Veronica replied, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She walked straight toward the stairs, her gaze sharp as it caught Elena in the library doorway. "What is she doing here?" Veronica's voice was laced with disdain. Elena held her ground. "I was looking after the boys." Veronica turned to Alexander. "Do you hear yourself? You let a stranger wander your home, your children's rooms, your wife's library? Catherine trusted me with their future, not her." Alexander's jaw tightened. "The boys are calmer with her. That's a fact I can't ignore." Veronica's expression hardened, but she said nothing more. She swept past them both, heading up the stairs, the scent of her perfume trailing in her wake. When the echo of her steps faded, Alexander felt a storm brewing inside him. He stood in the hall, torn between two women, one who represented the world he had always known, and one who had brought unexpected stillness into his broken home. Later that night, long after Veronica had left and the house had gone quiet, Alexander walked past the nursery. The twins slept soundly, their breathing even. Elena's blanket lay folded neatly on the chair, a quiet testament to her care. He lingered at the door, staring at the tiny figures in their cribs. And for the first time, he wondered if the path to healing might lie not in shutting out the past, but in allowing it to return through Elena, through the fragments of Catherine she carried, through the children who needed more than his wealth. The first frost of November clung to the edges of the Whitmore estate, turning the garden pale beneath a rising Sunday inside. The warmth of the nursery contrasted sharply with the chill outdoors. Ethan and Noah stirred in their cribs, restless, while Elena moved quietly between them, humming softly. Alexander stood at the threshold, arms crossed, the fatigue of another sleepless night etched into his face. "They're growing stronger," Elena whispered, tucking a blanket around Ethan. "Soon they'll crawl faster than we can keep up." Her tone was light, but Alexander's mind was heavy. Veronica's late-night visit lingered in his thoughts. He had tried to dismiss it, to remind himself of the peace Elena brought, but suspicion gnawed at him. What if Veronica was right? What if he was being reckless? The doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected. Alexander frowned, striding quickly through the hall. When he opened the door, his stomach dropped. Veronica stood on the steps, but she was not alone. Beside her was a woman in a gray coat carrying a leather folder, a social worker. "Good morning, Alexander," Veronica said smoothly, her smile cold. "I've taken the liberty of arranging a welfare check for the twins. It's in their best interest." The social worker introduced herself politely, though her tone carried an authority that brooked no refusal. We've received concerns regarding the children's care. I'll need to see them and speak with anyone responsible for their daily needs." Alexander's pulse quickened. He felt the walls of his home close in, marble and glass, turning into a cage. "This is unnecessary," he said firmly. "My sons are safe." "Safe?" Veronica arched an eyebrow. "With an unqualified housemaid acting as their mother? Catherine entrusted me to look after them, and I intend to." Elena appeared at the top of the stairs, Noah balanced against her hip, Ethan clutching the fabric of her sleeve. The babies were wide-eyed, sensing the tension below. The social worker's gaze immediately shifted to her. "Are you the caregiver?" the woman asked. Elena adjusted the baby gently, her voice calm but steady. "I look after them when no one else can." Her words hung in the air, simple and true, yet dangerous. Alexander felt his control slipping. He wanted to defend her, to defend himself, but his throat was dry. The twins whimpered, their small cries echoing down the stairs. Veronica seized the moment. "You see, they're unsettled. They need stability, not improvisation." She turned to the social worker with a pointed look. "I warned you." The babies began to cry louder, a desperate sound that filled the hall like breaking glass. Elena rocked them gently, whispering, but the tension in the air was too thick. The social worker scribbled notes, her expression unreadable. Alexander stood frozen, torn between fury and fear. The empire he had built felt useless here. No deal, no contract could shield him from the possibility of losing his sons. And as the cries echoed through the marble halls, louder than ever before, he realized the storm he had dreaded was no longer approaching. It had already entered his home. The cries of Ethan and Noah carried through every corner of the estate, piercing deeper than any accusation Veronica could hurl. Elena descended the staircase slowly, each step deliberate, murmuring to the twins with a gentleness that seemed almost out of place amid the tension. Her arms cradled them like fragile glass, but her gaze was steady as it met the social workers. "They cry because they feel your fear," Elena said softly, though her words were directed to Alexander as much as anyone else. "Babies know when love is questioned." The social worker hesitated, her pen hovering above the page. For a moment, something flickered across her features, an unease that contradicted her neutral posture. Veronica, however, was relentless. "This isn't about feelings," she snapped. "It's about qualifications, stability, and what Catherine wanted. You, of all people, should respect that, Alexander." Alexander's jaw tightened. He felt the echo of Catherine's absence in every syllable. A wound reopened with brutal precision. "Don't you dare speak for her," he said, his voice low, controlled. "Then who will?" Veronica stepped closer, her perfume sharp, invasive. "She trusted me. You're blinded by grief, clinging to a replacement who has no right to those children." The word replacement struck Elena like a physical blow, yet she didn't falter. Instead, she shifted Noah higher against her chest and whispered a line of a lullaby, the same one Catherine used to hum late at night. The twins stilled, their sobs faltering into hiccups, tiny fists loosening. The house grew quiet, as if holding its breath. Alexander's heart lurched. That melody it had belonged to Catherine, to the memory of nights he had chosen work over family. How could Elena know it? The social worker finally spoke, her tone cautious. "The children appear comforted by her. That matters." She glanced at Veronica, then back at Alexander. "Still, protocol requires a full assessment. I'll need records, medical updates, proof of care. Until then, I'll be filing a preliminary report." Alexander's palms grew damp. The machinery of bureaucracy was grinding into motion, cold and impersonal, and he had no power to stop it. He looked at his sons, their wide eyes fixed on Elena, their peace tethered to her presence. "Enough," he said at last, his voice rough but resolute. "This is my home, and those are my sons. If anyone doubts that I can protect them, then they'll answer to me." Veronica smirked, certain she had tightened the noose. "We'll see, Alexander. Courts favor mothers, or those willing to become one." The social worker closed her folder. "I'll be in touch." With that, she left, her heels clicking sharply against the marble until the sound vanished into silence. Veronica lingered, her smile brittle, victorious. You're losing them, Alex. And when you do, don't blame me." She swept out, the door shutting behind her like a final judgment. The hall was quiet again, save for the faint breaths of the twins pressed against Elena's chest. Alexander turned toward her, his defenses cracked wide open. For the first time, he allowed himself to admit the truth out loud, even if only in a whisper. "I can't lose them," he said. "Not again. Not to her." Elena looked at him, her expression a mixture of sorrow and quiet determination. "Then you'll have to fight for them, not with anger, but with love. That's the only way." Alexander felt the weight of her words settle over him. For years he had fought in boardrooms and negotiations, battles won with money and pride. But this was a war of the heart, and he was unprepared. As the twins stirred once more, their small hands clinging to Elena's blouse, Alexander realized he faced a choice he could no longer postpone. And though the winter sun still shone weakly through the tall windows, all he could feel was the storm gathering inside his own chest. The mansion had never felt so hollow. After the social worker's visit, every room seemed to carry the echo of judgment, each corner whispering doubts Alexander couldn't silence. The twins had finally fallen asleep in their nursery, soothed only by Elena's quiet presence, while Alexander retreated to his study with a tumbler of whiskey he couldn't bring himself to drink. He sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the framed photograph of Catherine that had never left its place. Her green eyes seemed to hold questions he didn't want to answer. "What would you have me do?" he murmured into the silence, though no reply came. Driven by restlessness, he opened the bottom drawer, the one he had avoided since her death. Inside were papers, notebooks, and a small leather-bound diary Catherine had used during her pregnancy. His fingers trembled as he lifted it, the worn cover soft beneath his touch. Flipping through the pages, he found entries about cravings for peach pie, sleepless nights, and dreams for their son's future. But then, halfway through, her handwriting shifted more hurried, more fragile. "Met someone today." One line read, "Her name is Elena. Works nights at the hospital. I was terrified. Thought I was losing the babies again. She sat with me. No judgment, just presence. Somehow, the fear lessened." Alexander's breath caught. Elena's name appeared again and again in the following pages. Catherine wrote about tea she brought, stories of her own daughter, even how the twins seemed calmer when Elena placed her hands on her swollen belly. "You have a gift," one entry said, addressed directly to Elena. "If anything happens to me, I pray you'll stay close to them. They already know you." The glass in Alexander's hand slipped, spilling whiskey across the desk. His pulse pounded in his ears. Catherine had known Elena, trusted her, maybe even chosen her. He closed the diary quickly, as though it burned his hands, but the words branded themselves into his mind. For the first time, the threads of suspicion shifted. What if Elena's presence here wasn't coincidence at all? A faint sound drew his attention, the creak of the hallway floorboards. Elena stood in the doorway, a folded blanket in her arms, her face calm but unreadable. "The boys are asleep," she whispered. Alexander swallowed hard, the diary hidden under his palm. "Elena, why didn't you tell me you knew Catherine?" The question hung heavy, his voice laced with accusation and desperate need. Elena's eyes darkened, and for a moment she looked as though she might turn away. But she stepped into the study instead, her hands tightening around the blanket. "Because you weren't ready to hear it," she said softly. Her words cut through him like a blade. The study, once his sanctuary, now felt like the stage for a revelation he wasn't sure he could bear. And for the first time since Catherine's death, Alexander realized he wasn't the only one carrying secrets of the past. Elena moved closer, her steps measured, as though she were entering sacred ground. She laid the blanket over the back of the chair opposite Alexander, then rested her hands gently on its edge. Her gaze fell on the diary he had tried to hide, and for the first time, her serene expression cracked with sorrow. "You found it," she said quietly. Alexander's throat tightened. "She wrote about you, about how you sat with her in the hospital, how you touched her belly and calmed the boys. You've known them longer than I have." His voice wavered. "Why would you keep that from me?" Elena lowered herself into the chair, folding her hands in her lap. "Because it wasn't my story to tell. Catherine trusted me, but I didn't know if she wanted you to know. She was protective of you, even when she was scared. She thought you carried too much already." Her words felt like a hammer against Alexander's chest. He remembered Catherine's laughter, her endless optimism, even in pain. And here was Elena, an echo of those final months, holding pieces of Catherine's life he had never been part of. He leaned back, covering his face with both hands. "I thought you were just another employee. Just someone who happened to walk through that door when I was desperate. But you've been here since the beginning." "Yes," Elena admitted, her voice trembling now. "From the beginning. I promised Catherine I would be there for the twins, no matter what. And when the ad for house staff appeared, I knew it was my chance to keep that promise. Not to replace her, not to intrude, just to be close enough that they wouldn't feel so alone." The words pierced him. But beneath the sting, there was something else. Relief. Relief that the peace he had seen in his sons wasn't some inexplicable miracle, but a thread tied back to Catherine herself. Alexander rose from his chair and paced the study, his footsteps echoing against the hardwood. "Do you realize how this looks? To me? To the world? A stranger with no credentials, no references beyond scraps of paper, and now I find out you had a secret connection to my wife? What am I supposed to think?" Elena stood as well, her composure returning. "Think whatever you need to, Alexander, but don't mistake secrecy for betrayal. Catherine trusted me with the most precious thing in her life. She believed you'd see it for what it was when the time was right." Her voice was steady, yet her eyes glistened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the grandfather clock in the hall. At last, Alexander pressed his hands flat on the desk, the diary beneath them. "I don't know if I can trust you," he admitted, the words raw. "But I do know this. I can't deny what I've seen. My sons, they choose you. They calm with you. They look for you." He lifted his eyes to hers. "And that terrifies me more than anything. Ems." Elena stepped closer, her presence quiet but firm. "It doesn't have to terrify you. It can teach you." Something shifted inside him, a crack in the wall he had built around his grief. But before he could respond, the piercing cry of one of the twins shattered the silence. Elena turned instinctively toward the sound, but Alexander raised a hand. "Number, this time I'll go." She hesitated, searching his face, then nodded. Alexander's steps up the staircase felt heavier than any deal he had ever brokered. But when he entered the nursery, he found little Gabriel twisting in his crib, tears streaking his flushed cheeks. Alexander bent down, awkwardly lifting the child into his arms. Gabriel squirmed at first, but then, as Alexander whispered softly nonsense words, fragments of lullabies he barely remembered, the baby's sobs quieted. His tiny fingers clutched Alexander's shirt, holding on as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. For the first time in months, Alexander felt a fragile warmth bloom in his chest. A connection not through fear, not through obligation, but through something deeper. Downstairs, Elena listened to the silence settling over the house once more. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping as she whispered to herself, "Catherine, he's learning." And Alexander, cradling his son in the dim glow of the nursery lamp, knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning in Montclair carried a strange heaviness, the kind of chill that crept in even when the sun tried to break through the clouds. Alexander hadn't slept. He sat at the edge of his bed, the diary Catherine had left still pressed against his palm. Her words had followed him into the night, each sentence a reminder that the woman he thought he had lost completely had, in her own quiet way, left him a map, and that map had a name, Elena. When he finally rose, he found Elena already in the nursery. She moved with unstudied grace, rocking Matthew with one arm while adjusting Gabriel's blanket with the other. The babies, so often restless, looked utterly content in her care. For a moment, Alexander simply watched, a mixture of awe and unease gripping his chest. "Elena," he said at last, his voice rasped by exhaustion. She looked up, her eyes calm but searching. "We can't keep circling around this, Catherine. She wrote about you. She wanted you here. But why did you hide it from me?" Elena's lips pressed together, her shoulders lifting with a soft sigh. "Because grief is fragile, Alexander. You weren't ready to hear her words. And I wasn't ready to be the reminder of what you'd lost." He wanted to argue, but before he could, the sharp click of heels echoed from the staircase below. The sound was unmistakable. Marcella. The nursery door opened, and she entered with the poise of someone who owned the room already. Her silver hair gleamed under the light, her suit perfectly tailored. Her expression sharpened into something that might have once passed as concern but now looked like strategy. "Well," she said smoothly, scanning the scene. Her gaze lingered on Elena with a trace of disdain before settling on Alexander. "I see the rumors are true." Alexander stiffened. "What rumors?" "That you've allowed the help to become the heart of this household." She crossed the room with deliberate steps, her heels tapping against the wood floor. "Alexander, what are you thinking? Entrusting your children to someone like her?" Elena straightened, her arms instinctively tightening around Matthew. "I've done nothing but care for them," she said quietly. Marcella's smile was cold. "Care or interfere? Catherine's death has left a void, and you filled it with the first sympathetic face that wandered through your door." Alexander's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Marcella." But she pressed on, producing a folder from her leather bag. "This isn't about feelings, Alexander. It's about the children's well-being. You're allowing an unqualified woman to assume the role of mother. If the state looks into this, do you know what they'll see? Neglect, emotional dependency, exposure to an unvetted caretaker." The words hit like blows, each one striking at his deepest fear that he wasn't enough, that he was failing his sons even as he tried to protect them. His hand went instinctively to the diary tucked beneath his arm. Catherine's words suddenly felt fragile against Marcella's polished authority. "Elena," Marcella continued, her tone sharp now, "you are out of your depth. This is not your place, not your family. Don't you dare pretend otherwise." For the first time since her arrival in this house, Elena's composure cracked. Her eyes glistened, though her voice remained steady. "I never pretended. Catherine asked me to stay near them. She believed they needed me. And she was right. Marcella scoffed, dismissing the words with a flick of her hand. "Do you really expect me to believe Catherine would hand her children over to a cleaning woman?" Alexander's chest burned with anger, the weight of silence between them growing unbearable. He stepped forward, his voice low and rough. "You don't have to believe it, but I do." The air thickened, and even the babies seemed to sense the tension. Gabriel whimpered softly, reaching toward Elena as though he, too, wanted to shield her. Marcella's eyes narrowed, and her smile twisted into something sharper. "If you defy me, Alexander, you'll regret it." Marcella's words hung in the nursery like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Alexander stood tall, the diary clutched at his side like a shield. He had built a life negotiating with powerful men. But this was different. This was a battle not of contracts or mergers, but of flesh and blood. "You think you can threaten me into silence?" he asked, his voice steady but his pulse hammering. Marcella's eyes gleamed with cold confidence. "Threats aren't necessary. I have influence. Judges, listen to me. The courts value my word. If I file a report about the instability in this house, about an unqualified woman overstepping her bounds, your sons could be removed before you even realize what's happening." The words pierced him. Each one, striking a nerve he hadn't known, was exposed. He imagined his sons being carried out of this house by strangers, their small hands reaching back for him, for Elena. The image was unbearable. Elena stepped forward, her voice shaking but firm. "Don't use those boys as pawns. Catherine trusted me because she knew I would love them as my own. And they already know me. They reach for me. They calm with me. Can you not see it?" Marcella's lips curled into a thin smile. "Children cling to whoever gives them comfort. That doesn't mean it's healthy. Attachment built on desperation is not love, it's dependency." Alexander's hand trembled, but he opened the diary and read aloud, his voice breaking. "If anything happens to me, I pray you'll stay close to them. They already know you." He looked up, his eyes locked on Marcella's. Those are Catherine's words, her voice, her choice. For the first time, Marcella faltered. Her carefully composed expression slipped, just a flicker, but enough to reveal the unease beneath. "Grief makes people imagine things," she said quickly. "You can't let the scribbles of a dying woman dictate the future of these children." The tension in Alexander snapped. He moved to stand directly between Elena and Marcella, his shoulders squared, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "They're not scribbles. They are my wife's truth, and I will not let you erase her." Marcella's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of raw anger. "If you go against me, Alexander, you will regret it. I will make sure of it." But even as she spoke, Both twins began to cry, their tiny voices rising in tandem. They stretched their arms toward Elena, ignoring Alexander, ignoring Marcella. Only Elena. The sound cut through him like lightning. For once, there was no calculation, no weighing of outcomes. There was only the undeniable truth that his sons had already chosen her. He turned to Marcella, his voice steady, quiet, but edged with steel. Then let them take my word too. Let the courts, the town, the world hear it. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing not for business, not for appearances, but for my children. And I choose her. Marcella's mask cracked completely, her fury spilling into every line of her face. She snapped the folder shut with a sharp crack. "You'll regret this," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. She stormed out, her heels hammering down the staircase like gunfire fading into the distance. Silence rushed into the room, broken only by the hiccuping cries of the twins. Elena bent over their cribs, soothing them with gentle whispers, her hands steady even as her eyes shimmered with tears. Alexander sank into the chair near the window, his body shaking with the release of tension. He looked at Elena, then at his sons, and realized the truth. Marcella might return with lawyers, with accusations, with everything her influence could summon, but for the first time, he was ready. The battle for his family had begun, and this time, he would not back down. The mansion felt quieter after Marcella's departure, but it was not the same hollow silence that had haunted its halls before. This time, the stillness carried a fragile sense of relief, like the air after a storm. For the first time in months, Alexander wasn't pacing the marble floors with worry over contracts or mergers. Instead, he lingered near the nursery door, listening to the soft rhythm of Elena's voice as she sang the twins to sleep. The following days unfolded with a rhythm Alexander had never known. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, not onto a man buried in spreadsheets, but onto a father learning to make bottles and clumsily rocking his sons until his arms ached. Gabriel would cry if Alexander held him too stiffly, but when Alexander softened his grip, whispering nonsense about the weather or a memory of Catherine, the boy's sobs would ease. Each small victory felt monumental. Elena guided him gently, never with judgment. "Hold Matthew closer. He likes to feel your heartbeat," she would say, adjusting the baby's blanket. Gabriel calms when you hum, even if you don't know the tune. Her advice was practical, born of observation rather than books, and Alexander found himself clinging to it as if it were gospel. At night, after the twins were asleep, Alexander began joining Elena at the kitchen table. The grand dining room felt too formal, too cold for what they were building. Instead, they sat with mugs of tea, the overhead light casting a golden glow while the house lay in shadow. Elena would tell stories about her own daughter growing up, about the little things Catherine had shared in those long hospital nights. Alexander listened, sometimes in silence, sometimes with questions that revealed more of his longing than he intended. One evening he asked, "Did she ever tell you she was afraid of me? Afraid I wouldn't be enough?" Elena paused, her hands wrapped around her mug. "She wasn't afraid of you, Alexander. She was afraid of losing you to your own walls. She wanted you to see what she saw, that you had more love in you than you realized." The words lingered in the kitchen air, warm and heavy. Alexander lowered his gaze, the steam from his tea blurring the edges of his vision. For so long, he had believed his love was measured in what he provided: houses, security, a future. But sitting there, he began to understand that Catherine had wanted something simpler: his presence. The change did not happen overnight. There were setbacks. Some mornings the twins woke screaming, and Alexander froze, unsure of what to do. Other times, his temper flared when exhaustion wore him thin. But each time, Elena was there not to take over, but to steady him. "They just need to know you'll stay," she reminded him. One crisp October afternoon, Alexander gathered the courage to take the boys out on his own. The townspeople in Montclair were preparing for the annual Harvest Festival, and the park was alive with children darting between hay bales, vendors setting up stands of caramel apples and pumpkin pies, and the brass band rehearsing cheerful tunes. He struggled with the stroller, fumbling with the straps until a neighbor chuckled kindly and offered a hand. "First time?" the man asked. Alexander laughed awkwardly, a sound that surprised even him. "Something like that. Walking through the park with his sons, Alexander felt the stares of people who once knew him only as the distant businessman with a fortress-like mansion. But instead of turning away, he met their gazes, even nodding in greeting. The twins gurgled happily, kicking their feet at the sight of falling leaves, swirling like confetti. For the first time in years, Alexander felt something stir in him that wasn't tied to loss or fear. It was hope, quiet, tentative, but real. When they returned home that evening, Elena was waiting at the front steps. The boys squealed at the sight of her, stretching their arms as if they had run a marathon and she was the finish line. Alexander watched them, his chest tightening, then looked at Elena. "They smiled at strangers today," he said softly. "But when they saw you, it was different. Like they knew they were safe again." Elena reached to brush a fallen leaf from Gabriel's hair, her eyes warm. "That's because home isn't a building, Alexander. It's the people who make you feel you belong." By the time the Harvest Festival arrived, Montclair had surrendered fully to autumn. The streets were lined with golden leaves, the storefronts dressed with pumpkins and cornstalks, and the air carried the mingled scent of roasted chestnuts and apple cider. Families gathered in the town square, children chasing each other through hay mazes, while a brass band played cheerful tunes that echoed off the old brick buildings. Alexander walked among them, not as the aloof millionaire, but as a father. Matthew clung to his hand. Gabriel rode on his shoulders, giggling as he tried to catch the bubbles drifting from a vendor's stand. Elena walked beside him, carrying a small bag of caramel apples, and smiling whenever the twins pointed at something new. For the first time since Catherine's passing, Alexander felt like he was not an outsider watching life move on without him. He was part of it again. They found a bench near the fountain as the sun dipped low, lanterns strung across the square flickering to life. The twins sat between them, sticky-fingered and wide-eyed, laughing at the band's clumsy attempt to play Yankee Doodle. Alexander leaned back, breathing in the moment, the sound of his children's laughter filling the hollow spaces grief had left. He turned to Elena, his voice low. "I don't know what tomorrow holds. Marcella might come back with papers or threats, but I do know this. I'm not running anymore. Not from grief, not from fatherhood, not from them." He nodded toward the boys, who were now tugging at Elena's sleeve. "I'll be the father they deserve, and I'll make Catherine proud." And Elena reached over, resting her hand gently on his. "You already are," she whispered. Her words unlocked something in him. For years, Alexander had lived behind walls of marble and glass, mistaking control for strength. But here, in the glow of lanterns and the warmth of his children's laughter, he realized true strength was vulnerability, the courage to love without fear of loss. As the band struck up its final song, Matthew climbed into Alexander's lap, pressing a sticky hand against his cheek. "Daddy," he murmured, the word fragile yet sure. Alexander's breath caught. He had heard it before in passing, but this time it was different. This time it carried meaning. He wrapped his arms around his son, feeling Gabriel press close as well. And for a moment, the noise of the festival faded. There was only the three of them, and Elena watching with tears glistening in her eyes. On the walk home, lantern light guiding their steps, Alexander carried both boys in his arms. His back ached. His shirt bore the evidence of caramel and cider, but his heart was light. Elena walked at his side, steady as ever. At the mansion gates, he paused, looking up at the house that had once felt like a tomb. Tonight, it looked different, less like a monument to his loneliness, more like a home waiting to be filled with stories, laughter, and second chances. "Not all angels have wings," Catherine had written in her diary. Alexander finally understood. Some came in the form of ordinary people like Elena, who carried the gift of love into broken places. He pressed a kiss to each of his sons' foreheads, whispering softly, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And with that, the man who had once been defined by loss stepped through the door with his family, ready to build the life Catherine had always believed he could. As the story closes, we are left with the image of a man who once lived in silence, now walking home under the lantern lights with his sons in his arms. The marble halls that once echoed with emptiness are filled again not by grandeur or wealth, but by the simple sound of children's laughter and the steady footsteps of someone who chose to stay. It is not a perfect ending, for life seldom is, but it is an honest one, born out of love, humility, and the courage to change. And perhaps that honesty is what makes it so beautiful. If you have followed Alexander's journey, you may feel the weight of it. How a heart hardened by loss was softened by the innocence of children, and how trust, once buried, grew again in the soil of second chances. These are not just pages in a tale. They are reflections of something we all know too well, that redemption rarely comes in grand gestures. More often, it comes in the quiet decisions we make at a kitchen table, in the patience of a bedtime story, in the trembling courage to say, "I will not leave." Friends, if you found this story moving, press the number 1 inch, the comments. If it did not speak to you, or if you feel something was missing, press 0 and let us know, because every voice matters here. The lesson is simple, yet it echoes through the generations. Love has the power to remake us. To forgive is to free ourselves, and to embrace family, whether by blood or by choice, is to anchor our lives in something greater than ambition or pride. Money may build walls, but only love builds a home. In Alexander's stumble toward fatherhood, we are reminded that unconditional kindness can change a destiny, that every soul is worthy of belonging, and that true wealth is measured not by what we own, but by whom we hold close. Think of it this way: like a lamp glowing softly on a porch at dusk, one small act of compassion can guide us through the darkest stretches of our lives. Many of you listening tonight may recall the smell of a Sunday roast, the chatter of grandchildren around a dinner table, or the way your own parents looked across the room and nodded as if to say, "We made it this far together." Those memories are proof that happiness is not about perfection, it is about presence. And so, let this story linger with you, not as fiction, but as an invitation. Take a moment this week to reach out to someone you love. Write the note you've been meaning to send. Call the son or daughter you haven't heard from in a while. Sit down for supper with your family and notice the way light falls across their faces. These are the things that outlast us. These are the gifts we leave behind. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with a friend, or simply keep it close as a reminder that second chances are never out of reach. And if tonight you feel even a spark of gratitude for the family you have or the family you are still searching for, then this tale has done its work. Because in the end, we are all walking home beneath the same sky, carrying what we can, hoping to be met at the door by love that does not give up.